They say a mother's love is forever. But what happens when your daughter starts treating you like a burden? Not with screams, not with fights, but with silence, eye rolls, and polite corrections until one morning, over coffee and rain, she says just 7 words. You're embarrassing, Mom. Just stop. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I just stopped. That's the moment I realized I wasn't her mother anymore. I was just a shadow she couldn't edit out of her perfect life. She had erased me one sigh at a time, so I left her the only thing she truly gave me: distance. No drama, no revenge, just a letter, 7 sentences, no inheritance. And when she opened it after my funeral, she finally realized this wasn't abandonment. This was the echo of every moment. She chose not to see me, and by then, it was already too late. They say a mother's love is unconditional, but no one talks about when a daughter stops loving you back. Not out of rebellion, not out of anger, but out of shame. My daughter did, and the last thing she said to me before I quietly cut her out of my life and my will was just 7 words. You're embarrassing, Mom. Just stop. She didn't know it then, but she had just inherited the one thing I'd never meant to leave behind: silence. I was standing in my kitchen that morning, rinsing out a glass. It was raining lightly outside, the kind of rain that made you slow down and listen. Marissa was sitting at the breakfast bar, scrolling through her phone with her perfectly manicured fingers. Her posture was stiff, poised in that self-aware way people are when they're preparing to judge someone else. She had come over to check on me before the fundraiser we were attending that evening. What that really meant was she wanted to make sure I wouldn't embarrass her in front of the same people whose approval she'd been chasing for years. She tilted her head and looked up for barely half a second before saying, "Are you really wearing that dress tonight?" I smiled gently, instinctively, because that's what I had learned to do over the years with her. Quiet tolerance, small smiles. I said, "It's the same dress I wore to your graduation. You told me I looked elegant." She rolled her eyes, barely reacting. "Yeah, well, I was just trying to be nice." And then she did it. She delivered the line like a dagger hidden in a silk napkin. "You're embarrassing, Mom. Just stop." I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I didn't even flinch. That part of me had already gone quiet years ago, but something inside me clicked into place, like a safe locking shut. A final sound. It was such a small moment, and that's what made it powerful. There was no drama, no shouting, just a regular Wednesday morning, the smell of fresh coffee, the sound of rain, and a sentence that undid years of silent effort. She stood up, still scrolling through her phone, and added as she walked out, "Just wear black. Less you that way." I remember standing there at the sink long after she left, my hand still holding the glass under the faucet, long after it was clean. I didn't feel heartbreak. I felt recognition. This wasn't sudden. It was years in the making, and now it was clear. I thought back to when she was 13. She had begged me not to walk her to school anymore. Just drop me off. At the corner, people stare. I thought it was normal teenage stuff. Then 17, her birthday dinner, I'd written her a speech. She asked me not to give it. "You always say weird things. Let Dad do the toasts." Except Harold wasn't even around anymore. He had walked out when she was 10. Still, I stayed quiet. I always had. Even when he left me with a mortgage, a child, and half a heart, I kept going. I worked nights, baked birthday cakes from scratch, learned how to fix the dishwasher myself when the repair guy quoted me too much. I didn't complain. I didn't collapse. I just mothered. But over the years, I became something else in Marissa's eyes. I wasn't her role model anymore. I was a reminder of struggle, of sweat, of humility. She climbed the social ladder fast. Law school, influential husband, country club friends, wine tastings, pilots retreats, and somewhere along the way, I stopped fitting the mold she was trying to squeeze into. I became the outdated accessory she didn't know where to place in her curated life. I wore black that night, not because she told me to, but because I wanted to see what it felt like to fade. The fundraiser was glossy. People sipping cocktails with names I couldn't pronounce, laughing politely at stories I didn't understand. Marissa floated from group to group like a well-trained hostess, hugging the right people, smiling just wide enough for their phones. Someone asked her, "Is that your mother?" She glanced over, gave a brief smile, and said, "Oh, yes, that's Elizabeth. She's a little old-fashioned." Elizabeth? Not Mom. Not even my mother. Just Elizabeth. I left early. Didn't say goodbye. Didn't ask her for a ride home. I walked 2 blocks to my car in the rain and sat behind the wheel for almost 15 minutes before starting the engine. T home. I went to my writing desk and opened the ivory folder in the bottom drawer. My estate plan. Neat, well organized. Inside, her name appeared more than a dozen times. As executor, as beneficiary, as everything. I sat down. I didn't cry. I didn't second guess. I removed the pages with her name on them, one by one. In their place, I slipped in a letter. Cream envelope, heavy stock paper, written in my neatest handwriting, 7 sentences. I signed it with the same pen I'd used the day I filled out her adoption forms, back when she was still mine in every way that mattered. I placed the envelope back inside the folder, closed the drawer, and turned off the light. In the following days, I didn't return her calls. There were only a few, probably logistical, probably shallow. I went about my life quietly. I planted tulips in the garden. I took up watercolor again. I started writing in the mornings instead of checking emails. People don't realize how peaceful life can become when you remove the one person who keeps slicing at your sense of worth, one comment at a time. And Marissa wasn't cruel in the traditional sense. She didn't scream. She didn't hit. She simply erased me by degrees, with sighs, with glances, with unspoken disappointment. That kind of cruelty is harder to point to, but it leaves bruises just the same. A few weeks after the fundraiser, she sent a card for my birthday, a pre-written message with her signature. No personal note, just her name. I didn't reply. The more I pulled back, the more she leaned in, but not with love, with obligation. She started sending me information about independent living communities for active seniors. I'm 62. I still drive, still garden, still paint, still laugh. But in her mind, I was a burden that needed polite relocation. One afternoon, I sat at my kitchen table and stared at the card she'd sent still unopened. I realized something painful. She wasn't ashamed of me because of who I am. She was ashamed because I reminded her of who she used to be. Marissa wasn't born in a marble kitchen with custom cabinets. She was raised in a tiny 2-bedroom house with a leaky roof and a mother who worked until midnight to afford piano lessons. But she didn't want to remember that version of herself, so she buried me with it, and I had finally stopped fighting to be remembered. I called my lawyer the next week and finalized the changes. Everything I had, my savings, my home, my jewelry, my paintings, even the pearls I wore. At her christening, they were all redirected. Not out of anger, not out of revenge, out of release. She would receive one envelope, nothing more. I started writing in my journal again. I called it my second life. In it, I documented the quiet joys I'd ignored for years, walking barefoot in my garden, reading novels with the windows open, eating dinner by candlelight just because I could. I began volunteering at the library, reading stories to children on Saturday mornings. They laughed at my silly voices and hugged me without hesitation. It reminded me of a time when love wasn't earned through perfection. Marissa didn't visit after that. She sent flowers on holidays, signed by her assistant. I didn't miss her. That was the most painful part to admit, not to her, but to myself. A mother isn't supposed to fall out of love with her child, but sometimes the grief of being unwanted erodes something deeper than affection. It erodes identity. I didn't stop loving her out of choice. I stopped because I no longer recognized the girl I once raised in the woman she had become, and I no longer recognized myself in the mother she saw. I wasn't embarrassing. I was just inconvenient. There's a difference. And so, with one cream-colored letter sealed and waiting, I gave her exactly what she gave me for years, a version of love that looked like distance. She thought she was punishing me with disapproval, but she had no idea I was already gone. I used to think it was my fault. The distance, I mean, that invisible thread stretching between us for years, thinning with each birthday, each conversation that felt more like a performance than a connection. I told myself maybe I was too sensitive, too soft. Maybe I smothered her, or maybe I wasn't enough. I tried to trace the moment things began to change. The moment my daughter stopped seeing me as her home and started seeing me as her discomfort. There was no single moment, no one conversation or fight that explained it all. It was in the accumulation. The first time she rolled her eyes when I asked her about her day. The time she made a face when I laughed too loudly at a movie. The way she introduced me less and less to her friends, and when she did, it was always with a qualifier: this is my mom. She's a bit quirky. Quirky. That word stuck to me like a sticker someone slapped on my forehead when I wasn't looking. I wasn't quirky. I was trying to keep up with her world, trying to remain visible in a life she seemed determined to edit me out of. When she was little, she used to say I was her favorite person in the world. She'd climb into my lap with her socked feet, press her face into my neck, and whisper, "Don't ever let me go." I never did, but she let go of me. I remember when she got her first job out of college, some firm with polished floors and people who said synergy like it meant something. She was so proud. I was too. I took her out for dinner, bought her a bracelet. Nothing fancy, just something small. She looked at it, smiled politely, and said, "It's sweet, Mom. Just not really my style." I said, "It reminded me of you." She didn't wear it. I never saw it again. Over the years, I learned to give less, not out of spite, out of self-protection. Every time I tried, I felt her pulling away more, so I began to shrink myself in her presence. I avoided stories she might find boring. I dressed carefully, spoke softly, made sure not to laugh too loud or mention things that might make her uncomfortable. I became a version of myself I barely recognized, all for proximity. But even that wasn't enough. She invited me to her engagement party, of course, sat me at a side table near the buffet. I remember trying to catch her eye as she walked around the room, glowing, radiant, holding court like the star she'd become. But she was careful not to look too long in my direction, as if seeing me might crack the image she was curating for the world. After the party, I stayed behind to help clean up. Her fiancé's mother thanked me and handed me a trash bag. Marissa said nothing. On the drive home, I cried. Not loud, not desperate, just slow tears that slid down without effort. The kind of tears that come when you finally acknowledge something has broken too quietly to fix. I told myself things would change when she became a mother, that maybe she'd understand then, but she didn't. She and her husband chose not to have children, which is fine, of course. That was their right. But it meant the possibility of reconnecting through shared experience disappeared. There were times when I tried to ask her, gently, what had shifted between us. I remember one afternoon, we were sitting in a cafe. She was on her phone, answering emails between bites of salad. I said, "Do you ever miss how we used to be? When we'd make pancakes on Saturdays and dance around the kitchen in socks?" She looked up, confused. "Mom, that was decades ago." No, I said softly, but I still remember it like yesterday. She smiled politely, the kind of smile you give a cashier, then went back to her phone. It was always like that, and the worst part, she wasn't cruel. That would have been easier. Cruelty gives you something to push against, but Marissa was always composed, cordial, cold, like she had placed our relationship into a well-decorated box and stored it on a shelf labeled obligation. She visited on major holidays, sometimes with her husband, sometimes just a gift and a note. She always looked around my house like it was a museum of someone else's past. I had kept her room intact for years, same posters, same books, but she never went inside, never even peeked through the door. Eventually, I turned it into an art room, not out of resentment, out of necessity. That space deserved to be lived in, even if she had no interest in it anymore. I began painting again in my 50s. Landscapes mostly, soft colors, rolling hills. Sometimes I'd paint a single red coat, walking alone down a snowy street. I didn't realize until much later that it was always me in those paintings, walking away from something that never turned back. I joined a small art circle at the community center. All women in their 60s and 70s. We painted. We drank tea. We talked about our kids. Most of them had similar stories. My daughter only calls when she needs something. My son doesn't like me visiting. His wife thinks I meddle. They say they're busy, but they always find time for everyone else. I wasn't alone. That was both comforting and devastating. At some point, a quiet truth settled over me like morning fog. Marissa wasn't going to come back. Not really. Not as the girl who once braided friendship bracelets and slipped one on my wrist with the words "Best Mom" written in blue glitter. That version of her was gone. And maybe, just maybe, my version of motherhood needed to go with her. I didn't want to be the mother who begged for affection, who lived off breadcrumbs of attention, who kept showing up just to be quietly dismissed. I had given her a childhood, filled with laughter, warmth, safety, and sacrifice. And now, I wanted to give myself something too. Peace. I stopped calling first. stopped sending her little gifts, stopped asking how she was unless she asked first. And strangely, she didn't notice. Or maybe she did, but she approved. Less noise from my direction probably felt like freedom to her. But to me, it was clarity. That clarity grew stronger after the fundraiser, after I rewrote the will, after I placed that letter in the folder. I didn't tell anyone what I'd done. Not my lawyer, not my friends, not even the women at the art group. It was mine, a private line I drew with invisible ink. She wouldn't see it until I was gone, and by then, it wouldn't matter what she said or didn't say. The story would already be told. In the months that followed, I began to find versions of myself I had long buried. I started playing piano again, though I'd never been great. I read poetry in the evenings, sat on the porch with tea, watched the clouds move like slow dancers across the sky. I found joy in being unseen. I wasn't trying to impress anyone anymore. One afternoon, I passed a mirror and saw myself barefoot, hair in a loose bun, apron on, smudged with paint, and I smiled, not because I looked beautiful, but because I looked like me, the me I had been before I tried to shrink, apologize, adjust, perform. The me who used to build cardboard castles on the floor with Marissa, who danced in the living room alone, who cried at said movies without hiding it. I began to wonder, had I allowed her to erase me? Had I handed her the pen and asked her to draw the outline of who I should be? And worse, had I believed her version? But not anymore. Now, I was drawing my own edges, and I wasn't leaving her out of my will out of anger. I was leaving her out because she had already left me out of her life, long before lawyers and paperwork. She made her choice in the quiet ways, with her silences, her corrections, her distance, and I made mine with peace. My legacy wouldn't be a trust fund. It would be a lesson. The lesson she ignored every time she treated me like an accessory instead of an ancestor. The lesson that love cannot be measured by what you inherit but by what you remember. And I was finally ready to be remembered the right way. The funeral was quiet. I had made sure of that. No open casket, no long eulogies, no formal procession, just a short, simple service at the chapel I used to walk past every Sunday morning. I'd prearranged it all, no burden left to anyone, not even her. I had even written a brief obituary myself. Elizabeth Rose Hammond passed away peacefully, surrounded by the quiet she had come to love. No mention of loving mother, no mention of survivors. Just me. Because by the time I took my last breath, I didn't feel like someone's mother anymore. Not really. That thread had unraveled too far to grasp. Marissa arrived at the funeral 15 minutes late. She wore black, of course, but in her usual curated way, everything tailored, everything expensive. She looked like someone attending a public relations event, not mourning the woman who once stayed up 3 nights straight when she had the flu as a child. She nodded at the priest, hugged to people, sat near the back, didn't cry. I know because the chapel had cameras. I'd asked for the footage in advance. Yes, even after death, I wanted to see one last thing. Not for judgment, just to know. She looked bored, restless, checked her phone twice during the hymns. She didn't speak, not once. And when the service ended, she left before the organ finished playing. 2 days later, she received the envelope. It had been prepared well in advance, addressed in my handwriting, delivered by my lawyer, just as instructed. No ceremony, just a manila envelope, hand-delivered to her office. Inside, a cream-colored letter, 7 sentences long. My final conversation with the daughter who had long since stopped listening. Marissa sat at her desk, reading the letter alone. Her assistant wasn't in the room. Her husband was out of town. Just her and my words. This is what the letter said. Marissa, I loved you longer than you'll ever understand. I gave you everything I had, not just things, but hours, energy, and softness I didn't even know I possessed. I tried to stay in your world, even when it was clear I wasn't welcome. I hope someday you remember me with warmth, not inconvenience. You will not find yourself in my will, but you will find yourself in the mirror. I hope you like what you see. Mom, there was no trust fund waiting. No house deed. No heirloom passed down with trembling hands. Just those words, and the space left behind by everything I chose not to give. She didn't call, not immediately, but 3 days later, she showed up at my house, unannounced. I wasn't there, of course, but the new owner was a young woman named Carly, who ran an after-school art program and had been one of the recipients in my updated estate plan. Marissa knocked twice. When Carly opened the door, Marissa looked around with confusion. I'm here to see the property. My mother passed away last week. This was her house. Carly smiled softly. Yes, I know. I bought it from the estate. I'm sorry for your loss. Marissa blinked. I wasn't told it had been sold. The attorney handled everything. The foundation got most of the estate and some local programs. I was one of the beneficiaries. Wait, Marissa said, voice flattening. Are you telling me my mother gave this house to strangers? Carly didn't flinch. Not strangers, just people she believed in. And then she closed the door. Marissa stood on the front steps for a long time after that. I don't know what she was thinking. Maybe about her childhood room, the garden she never tended, the kitchen she called outdated. Or maybe she wasn't thinking at all, just standing there, still trying to understand how silence could be so final. She sent an email later that night to my lawyer. It was short. I don't understand. She never said she was upset. Why didn't she tell me? The reply was already written, scheduled, and ready to send. My voice, from beyond the grave. She did. You just weren't listening. In the weeks that followed, Marissa tried to contest the will, briefly, but everything had been airtight, ironclad, signed, witnessed, recorded. No loopholes, no mistakes. Eventually she stopped. I don't know if she cried. I doubt it, but I know she started seeing a therapist. Someone told Carly they'd seen Marissa leaving a grief group in the city. Maybe she was grieving the inheritance. Maybe she was grieving something else. She never showed up to the art program, never visited the garden, never asked about the paintings, the piano, the pearls. She let all of it go, just as she had let go of me slowly, and then all at once. But here's the thing about letting go. It's easy until you're the one being left behind. I didn't write that letter to punish her. I didn't cut her out to make a statement. I did it because I needed to leave this world the way I entered it, holding on to dignity. And because I finally understood that not every silence is empty. Some silences carry weight. Mine was full of memory, clarity, and freedom. I had spent so many years trying to be enough, trying to soften myself to fit into her world. But in the end, I realized she never wanted my softness. She wanted absence. So I gave it to her. Cleanly, quietly, permanently. In her world of curated perfection, I became the one flaw she couldn't Photoshop out, the one truth she couldn't recast, the one legacy she couldn't manipulate. She said I was embarrassing. So I left her a letter, not an inheritance.